know a lot of you. Cool. Go ahead and do the honors there. Hi, Lane.
It's a nice suit.
Yeah. I only wore it for you.
There's a couple of them.
Oh, whoops.
There are refreshments in the fridge if anybody wants some. I put BYOB, but I didn't happy. That's the way it kind of works here.
Sorry, I let you down.
I know. It's okay. You never know. My senior study was called Starving After the Light. Initiation in Religion, Ritual, Altered States, the Shadow, and the Spiritus. Which we'll explain what that word means towards the end. But the title basically just came from my unflinching, unquenched desire to experience the spirit and God or goddess or what have you my whole life, which has followed me always. Except for a couple, diversions here and there. Like, punk music and girls and stuff. But mostly that was the whole thing, always. Steven. Here. My right hand.
How am I going to take a picture of you? I'll let you see.
Yeah, I want like the up the nostril, like nasty like, chin hair pictures more than anything. So I kind of busted this up into 4 general sections, and I'm going to try to like blast through it as best as possible. This thing is I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
Remember that Fresh Prince of Bel-Air episode where he went to the prep school and had to wear one of these suits and then turn the jacket inside out to be different?
Yes.
Yeah, I do know.
Somebody did. Yeah. So, I don't think I'm even going to use a chalkboard. I guess we'll just kind of. I guess I'm just going to rap to y'all, and that'll work. Okay, my work at Goddard kind of started with me studying the world's religions, the world's major religions, because I had no firm, fundamental understanding of them really whatsoever. I had a lot of understanding of weird, esoteric movements and things, but it was all kind of diffuse. And luckily, Francis was very wise to tell me to take that curriculum the first semester and study the basics, so that I could get some of the key ideas down. It was very brief. I mean, each packet dealt with one major world religion, so it's kind of hard to cram Hinduism into 19 pages, but that was a learning experience. So thank you, Francis, for that. Yeah, that's definitely been a huge thing in this whole process. But what I found after looking at all of them and kind of studying them extemporaneously was that they all seemed to, I say here, sing to a fairly common melody, which just means it seemed to me like every religion in the world, whether it's Islam or Hinduism or Buddhism or Judaism or Christianity, they all obviously had good and bad aspects like any human product. But they all came from our desire to connect with this thing that we've always called God or the goddess or gods or it or the absolute or the grand architect of the universe, what have you. And that had always been here universally throughout our existence. And each culture and each place and each group of people comes up with some sort of means of explaining that to themselves, and that's kind of an anthropological explanation of it, which is kind of what makes sense to me. Just like every culture has a language, or an architectural style, or a culinary style, or a literary tradition, what have you, we each tend to have some kind of religion or spiritual tradition, or how tiny or how huge, it's always there. And that was very fascinating to me, and because I realized that a lot of the problems that we have in the world are that we fight over our nations for our nation's sake, which is ridiculous. And we fight each other because we're different colors and because we're different genders. and because we have different sexual orientations and all sorts of things like this. But it seems like ultimately the thing we're really not able to accept about other people, like in a deep down gut way, we're not able to accept so easily that they have a different route or explanation to God or the divine. And that's a problem, and I never really understood why it needed to be one. But anyhow, so I encountered this philosophy called the Perennial Philosophy, which is a book by Aldous Huxley. It's one of the best spiritual anthologies ever. But the Perennial Philosophy basically holds that all the world's religions, however obscure or however major, all issue from a point. And actually, I'll draw one little diagram. This guy Fritjof Schuon came up with this great thing. Like I said, I hate to do this, but...
Can I turn up the music, or is it on for a reason?
I love this song.
Okay. I can't hear
I'm
you.
just kidding. I think it's symphony operas. So this guy Fritjof Schuon, who is a Swiss theologian of the highest order, and I highly recommend his books on Islam and on religion in general, because he was able to kind of make sense of a lot of this stuff. But his whole thing was, this is like the unnameable source, the place where all of the religions come from, or all spiritual yearning comes from, sort of. You can call it God, whatever. And then you have this line through here, and it's kind of like up in this area you have more mystical, esoteric, occult traditions. And then underneath here you have like the big major religions. Is that right? I think I got it right.
You're doing great, Andy.
I just can't remember, it might be upside down. But anyhow, so they come out, and the further away they get from here, the more rigid and ossified and dogmatic they get. You know, any type of fundamentalism is like a great example of that. And so that they all come back from this one. Like you would write, you know, Islam or like Judaism, Christianity, all the way down. And depending on how far away they are from this, that was his graph, affects their ability to actually allow people to have the kind of experiences that religion is there for, and was created for. You guys can, there's plenty of room back here. I don't know if you can meander through or something. But, so anyhow, the region up here would kind of be, well, let me make sure I covered all the bullets on here. Okay, yeah. I say here, the diversity of the world's religions and spiritual traditions are just as necessary as the diversity of cultures, people, plants, and animals. I mean, you wouldn't want to walk into a forest and see the same trees you would see on the other side of the globe. You know, we have differences in, we have biodiversity, so it's obviously that we're going to have diversity in every other aspect. The problem is people who are hardcore adherents of most religions think that that's the one. That that's the only way to get there, and that there's not any other, that everyone else is wrong. Some people even go so far as to condemn that other person to an eternity in hell, which is, makes Hitler looks like a nice guy to me. But up here is like what Schuon would call the esoteric area, which is systems or mystical systems that are closer to the source. And every major world religion, consequently and interestingly, has like an esoteric kind of underbelly. Islam has Sufism, Judaism has the Kabbalah. There's plenty of Christian mystics and tradition of Christian mysticism. And then so down here we have more so what's called the exoteric, and those are the big, you know, the jumbotron mega churches and you know, the huge major apparent obvious world religions that are basically seem to have everything figured out about the universe and the afterlife and all of that. So this distinction of esoteric and exoteric is really necessary because, well, it's a good tool for understanding religions in general because they're not monolithic. Like I said, particularly like in Judaism, there's the tradition called Kabbalah, which I'm sure you've all heard of Madonna, but she seems to have made that popular. But it's probably as old as, I don't know, several thousand years at least, but nobody really knows. But it's a mystical tradition that has to do with numerology and magic and strange diagrams and incantations and mystical experiences. And usually people in the mainstream part of that religion, or any religion that has an esoteric side, they usually kind of regard with disdain or consider to be heretical anyone who ventures into those regions. And the same way, I knew a bunch of Muslims who thought that Sufis were evil, you know, because they like to spin around and around and around and chant.
Is that similar to how, like, Christians would say pagans are evil?
Sure, but paganism doesn't, in this sense, doesn't necessarily. Paganism's kind of like pre-Christianity, right?
Yeah.
Or other than Christianity. I think
Just all
pagan means what? Country folk.
Yeah, well, in ancient Rome it referred to people who lived out in the country and consequently weren't followers of Christianity, which is the state religion.
Which was the new thing, the new trend. And so, I just wanted to cover that esoteric, exoteric distinction, because I think it's really important to understanding religions in general, and each religion on its own. Okay, moving on to the main kind of part of what I did my paper on. By initiation, I'm not necessarily referring to like a hazing ceremony at boot camp, or although that is a form of initiation, and I'm not necessarily only, well, okay, I'll just say, I have like what I call uppercase and lowercase initiation. And the lowercase, I mean actual rituals and ordeals, actual rites, all the minutiae of how people from all over the planet at all times have marked a transition from one part of your life into another via some sort of ritual. Whether you get your teeth knocked out and your hair pulled out and 3 scars put across your forehead, or circumcised, or whatever. We all kind of have, we've always had these ceremonies to try to mark whether, like, the question is, what are you marking? I mean, a lot of times, quote-unquote primitive or tribal or indigenous or traditional cultures, you know, will always have, I mean, it's been found in anthropology, we'll always have some sort of puberty ceremony where somebody moves on from being a young person to an adult, and therefore an actual full member of the tribe versus kind of a dependent on the tribe. And then you're also moving on in that essence to, you're moving on from being like a child of the universe who doesn't know anything about it, and then you're initiated into the ways of the culture, and basically you become a real person. You become a member of the universe and a member of the culture, and you can partake of it and try to understand it. So that's lowercase initiation. But really, it was the uppercase initiation that I really did my work on, and I included my definition for my thesis of it right here. And I defined that as the absolutely individual process of the gradual illumination by an inner unfolding of spiritual awareness and expanded consciousness, often marked by custom, symbol, ritual, altered states, ecstatic or ascetic practices, the ingestion of entheogenic substances, psychedelic is what entheogenic means, or by any other appropriate means. And so by uppercase initiation, I'm really talking about the process which begins perhaps before birth and extends after birth, but the lifelong process of gradually having the centers of consciousness open up and become more available to what's going on in the universe and other dimensions, or what we call other dimensions, and other levels of consciousness. And I guess that's called salvation over a long period of time. But it appeared to me that it was a lifelong process, and that it wasn't just going to be like, oh, can this happen, please? Thanks. You know, like, I'm good. You know, like, it's not like all of a sudden, like, oh, I'd really like it if you give me eternity in heaven, and I'll be a good person, and thanks, I'm good. You know, we're taken care of. You know, I'll get to see all my dead pets and my relatives, you know, up there, and it's going to be great, and then you're taken care of. And it always appeared to me weird to take that stance, because it's like, well, then what do you have to do? I mean, graduating from high school requires getting good grades on certain things are good enough, doing your homework, having to go to class, all of that. You have to do stuff, and it sucks, you know? But you have to do all this stuff to get that diploma, and for some reason people think that salvation, saving your soul from eternity, just occurs by a question being asked. And that never made any sense to me, because to me, my own personal soul's well-being and whatever comes after this, and this life, most importantly, was more important than graduating from high school. I guess that's why I dropped out. I don't know. But, so we kind of, is that kind of clear? That, like, initiation isn't just like a ritual or something, but I'm talking about initiation as a lifelong process of gaining closer and closer into the arms of the Savior or the Divine or whatever you like to call it. You know, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have an ultimate name, of course. And then in my paper, I made the distinction that this process of initiation of development had to, like, occur in, like, the different levels of the human, you know. You could be an incredibly ecstatic spiritual person. Maybe you're one of these people who's really given to psychic swoons or knowledge or, you know, anything like that. But if your mind is totally riddled with neuroses and complexes and it's not, you know, it's not healthy. Like, if your psyche isn't healthy, then your spirit's not going to be able to work really that right. You know, and consequently with the body, if you're just a lazy person who doesn't really do anything at all and doesn't train yourself to do anything, your mind is going to suffer. So it has to occur on, like, a multi-layered type of thing. It's not like just this. Like, so in my paper, I divided that up into body, mind, and spirit, or material, psychic, occult. Yeah. I think that's how I did it. And I'm trying to follow this because it's too much information. I could do this for like 3 hours, so I'm trying to make sure I don't say too much at any one point in time. But it does require development on all levels of the human body, the human being, and on their own terms. There's work you have to do.
Oh, can I ask a question about that?
Of course.
Yeah, I'm curious, like, have you found any traditions or religions that talk about how they have to unify and, like, integrate in order to do that? Or is it only talking about developing each one, or any of that? I'm not familiar with many, but I'm wondering if any of them talk about mind-body integration as a journey towards spirituality.
Yeah, I think that once they all have to be developed in tandem or in concert, and they all for the purpose of integrating them. I mean, like, they can't be coalesced if they're all unhealthy, I guess is the point. But they must be coalesced. You know, they must be dissolved into one another or integrated. But they have to be. I just use body, mind, spirit as a good model for understanding how one might advance on this path. Which every person, I have to say this as a disclaimer, every single person who's ever been born or not born or has been born or will be born has access to this process, and that it's absolutely, in my opinion, it's absolutely necessary. But no one is like somehow like immune to having to somehow face these ultimate questions, you know, like why are we here? And not so much why are we here, but why is anything at all? Which is always the biggest question for me. But in order to integrate the person into the greater cosmos, the microcosm to the macrocosm, I think it's necessary to think of them all, developing them all on their own terms for the process of integrating. You know,
and that process is what's different for everyone. That's where it becomes really unique to each person.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, because we're different people.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, so, you know, the body and the psyche must be explored and developed because they are gateways to the spirit. And I'll come to explain kind of what I mean by spirit towards the end. Here I say, theorizing and contemplating are important, but genuine spiritual development occurs by practice and practice alone. And what I meant by that was to say that you can fold your hands and, you know, at the beginning of a meal and thank God for the fried chicken you're about to stuff down your throat. And you can be a good person to your neighbor, you know, let them borrow your garden hose. You can, like, maybe put a new tire on your wife's car or something, you know. There's all sorts of nice things you can do, you know, and you can be a very good person. And think and talk about theology all night and all this stuff, you know, be obsessed with it and think about it. I've met plenty of people like that here, myself included. But practice itself is where you get the meat, is where you get like the product, you know, and like there's a whole litany of different types of practices that the world has offered us that we have access to now, and every different religion or tradition, most of them all have some sort of rubric for practice. You know, like Muslims have to pray. Well, I mean, I know many that don't, but I mean, you know, Muslims are supposed to pray 5 times a day towards Mecca at particular times of the day, and that may all sound arbitrary or crazy, and I don't know if even any of them would. Any of like my Muslim friends would understand this, or like they might even be offended by it. But to me, the ultimate point of doing something like that is not so that Allah will necessarily hear what it is that you need, but to force yourself to give. It's kind of like giving up your personal liberty, at least for those times of the day, and you're forcing yourself to do something that you don't want to do. I mean, you don't want to get out of bed at 5 in the morning and do that. You'd much rather sleep, right? But by doing hard spiritual practices that draw a lot of effort out of you, like for instance, sitting in one place without moving for 10 minutes is agonizing, at least at first. I mean, if you've ever tried it, it's not easy. You know, it sounds easy. I can pace back and forth around my apartment for 5 hours doing nothing.
I lasted 4 minutes the first time.
Yeah. And, you know, it's really hard though. Like, and so just sitting in one spot for 10 minutes is really difficult. And what you get out of that, I mean, that's kind of a whole other discussion, but practice itself is very necessary. I myself have subjected myself to a whole confused, manifold, you know, array of practices that involved all sorts of things. Other people, big groups of people, just me, mostly just me. And there's a lot. I don't know. I guess, you know, I had a series of rituals that I would do at the beginning of the day and the end of the day. And like, I would, in the middle of those, I would meditate, or what's called meditation. Sometimes it was just sitting there going, I fucking hate this. You know, I'm working. I hate you. You know, I really want to go get a hamburger. You know, like, why am I doing this? This is crazy. But practice after a long period of time begins to open up certain things within you. It's just like a marathon runner. If you want to run a marathon, you can't just lay on the couch and drink Pepsi and eat Cheetos and expect to run 29 miles. You have to go to the gym and whatever, running up and down the front steps of the Capitol or whatever. You got to do stuff that's painful. I mean, it is physically painful, and it starts to grate your nerves too, and you start to think, God, it's awful. Aleister Crowley one time said that there's 3 steps to there's 3 steps to the whole process of this practice thing. And at first, he said, you're always stoked about it. And patting yourself on the back, and you're like, this is great, I'm becoming a better person, and I'm doing this, and I'm responsible. And then you get to this period where it's awful, and you hate it, and you hate yourself for ever wanting to do it. And you start to really fall apart. And you get to this crux where you're just like, you either stop doing it or keep doing it. But the third leg of that process, as he said, is a kind of synergy of those first two, where you don't have that false idealism that you had at the beginning, but you've gotten past that point where you hate it and you feel like you're not getting anywhere and nothing's happening, and you realize that things are happening, but you're tempered a little bit. And it's at that point, if you can make it to that point, then you can kind of take on any kind of practice and grow. But if you just give up when it starts getting hard, you're not going to get anywhere, I mean, like, you'll just hurt yourself.
Did you discover that was more important, was the trial rather than the practice? Like the putting yourself through the difficulty of doing that practice than what you got out of the practice itself, or both, or either one?
I think both. I think they're kind of indistinguishable in a way. I mean, like, the trial is part of the practice, and it could be anything. I mean, it's just, but having to work hard to do it. I mean, how many of us spend how many hours on our feet every day, like bussing tables or washing dishes or doing something awful, just to make rent? If we do this type of hard practice and spiritual work, it'll probably avail things that are better for us as people than just paying the rent. So it's important. But the thing is it's not just about, waving a pendulum around or like, saying something or thinking something. I mean, you have to do something. This is like, what is it, Blaise Pascal said that all of mankind's... I didn't hang out with him. All of... Blase. Yeah. He would have wished it was Blase. Blaise Pascal said that all of mankind's problems came from our inability to just sit on our asses in the room in the dark.
Yeah.
And if everybody did that every day, then we might be in a slightly different position.
So, I'm sorry, I know you gotta get going, but to practice, this is dumb, I'm so inarticulate, but practice involves action, right? Repetitive action. It seems like mystical experience that denies the aspect of mystical experience that occurs in total inaction. So it seems like practice would almost be distracting, right? Like if you're in physical pain, that would be distracting from... Or
it's not always
pain can
painful,
be sublimation,
I guess.
of course.
What's that?
Pain can be sublimation, I think. But anyway, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's tricky.
I mean, well, yeah, I think practice can involve action and inaction. I mean, practice can involve... I mean, like, for instance, the Hindus have this great system of yoga, and it has many different branches, and there's like a karma yoga, and karma yoga has to do with work, and with deeds, and with, it's normal everyday life. I mean, doing the dishes, not, being a jerk, doing what you need to do, and good actions, Look at this.
I like dishes, not being a jerk. Let's do it.
Taking out the trash, making the bed.
What are some other yogas that offer different things?
Oh yeah, okay, so there's another kind of yoga called Bhakti Yoga, which, is that right? Bhakti Yoga, which is the yoga which has to deal with like love and adoration and emotion. And all these things are directed towards the deity, and so Bhakti yoga has to do with our emotional side and our adoration side, and it's kind of like your approach to God is almost more like a lover you're trying to swoon, you know, and get closer to, and that's really beautiful.
But wouldn't you say that a lot of these actions, it's like it's the intention behind the action that's really important? It's not just loving someone or doing the dishes, it's the intention behind it that's pushing you through it. Why are you doing it? What are you hoping to achieve?
Yeah. I'm just trying to shove each of them into a little tiny nutshell that sort of makes sense. I mean, I'm sure some people would say that, or some people would say the other. But well, what they did is they took every aspect of your life and made it so that every one could become a systematic approach to spiritual development. You know, this is, what, 1,000 years old, 1,200 years old, I don't know. And then, like, there's Jnana Yoga, which has to do with the intellect and the mind versus the heart and the emotion, which Bhakti dealt with. And Jnana Yoga has to do with philosophizing and theologizing and words and arguments and understanding God and talking about what these things mean. You know, that's separate from love and emotion. I mean, it's not separate because they're all inside of you, but different center of your being. You know, whereas like Raha Yoga is like the highest, you know, yoga, the most austere, and that deals with developing the mind, developing the psyche, really. I mean, I can't think of a better word, towards being able to having more control over it. You know, having more control over it, and then entering into states where you really do see the light, or whatever it is. There's all sorts of ways of that happening, of course, for every person. But Raha Yoga really does deal with high spiritual development. And then to round it all out, there's Hatha Yoga, which is what Americans are most familiar with, and that's where you put your body into all sorts of cantankerous pretzel-like positions, and, you know, eat organic food and all that sort of thing. But it has to do with the way you bathe and you sleep and stand, your posture. You know, the body has to be treated in a particular way, or it's not going to be able to do these other things. So it's kind of this whole, I just use yoga itself and all the yoga systems as an example of a culture who really came up with some good stuff, like school stuff, you know. I mean, it's like, it was all very thought about and figured out, and well, it still is. Yeah, tried. It developed, I guess, is the word I was looking for. It wasn't just like, oh, do what you want. You're saved. Don't lie. Don't smoke. Don't covet your neighbor's wife. Okay, here we are. Moving on. Let's see. Moving on, models of initiation. Okay, so this, in my paper, and in my last 2 semesters at Goddard, I started to find, I got into mythology and Joseph Campbell, Path of the Hero stuff, and I realized that after studying the Path of the Hero in as many different vestiges as I could find it, and I was supposed to read Parsifal, didn't read Parsifal, it's boring. Yeah, I couldn't get through it. I'm sorry, I had too much on my plate. But I got the general gist of it, and so I was looking at Grail legends, and I was looking at the different mythologies of the world, and realized that there is this program or sequence or like algorithm of what the hero goes through, and it's beautifully and eloquently talked about in the Campbell's book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, which I would recommend to every human being on Earth. And it really kind of started to fascinate me that, like, this hero thing isn't like, this hero story, hero myth stuff isn't here for us just to be like, oh, cool, look at the hero, look at the, you know, the New York Fire Department guy who, you know, saved somebody from a building, or look at the, like, the action movie hero, or look at the boxing, you know, champion, or the sports star, or the celebrity, or somebody out there, or the rock star. The whole idea of learning about these hero stories was to, I think, kind of underneath the story, they're actually kind of like a diagrammatic, they show some sort of sequence of spiritual development, you know, of moral development, psychological development, spiritual development, human development, and that it wasn't just all about, like, a good story. And so that was really fascinating to me, and I realized that there is kind of something there with that might inform my own life, which was definitely in need of informing at the time, and still is. But so I studied that for a while, and then I realized after I'd been studying the Tarot for a couple months or something, maybe a year, and I realized that in the trumps there is a certain process. The trumps are the big cards, the cards that, you know, like Death, the Hermit, the Hanged Man, all these things, the Fool, the Magus. I realized that in the trumps and in the procession of the trumps and the sequence of the trumps, there is a kind of program, there is a kind of sequence that it seems like some type of person or ego or hero could go through and start from at the beginning, like with the Fool, and which consequently in the beginning of Parzival, the main knight, Parzival, the main character of the story, is totally foolish. His mom dresses him up in ridiculous clothes and sends him out on like a donkey and says, "Have a good time being a knight, buddy," you know, like, and he's totally a fool. He doesn't know anything. He doesn't know how to speak for himself. He doesn't know anything but what his mother taught him. But anyhow, in the trumps, there's a really interesting process, and I did like a 2-packet, 50-page paper on the practical, or on the psychological and initiatory implications of the Tarot, and found a lot there. And I realized that the Tarot is, you know, not necessarily something that I don't think that its purpose originally, at least, was to lay out cards and tell somebody something that's going to happen in their life, you know. And unfortunately, too much of the focus on it now. I used to work at the biggest New Age bookstore in the Midwest for a year, so I've seen it. Too much of the focus on the Tarot now is about where can I buy a deck and have somebody lay it out for me so I can figure out who I'm going to marry, or how much money I'm going to inherit, or, you know, how I'm going to make a fortune or something. And that's very base, and like you kind of just have to pass by those people. But I think that the original purpose of the Tarot was to provide us with a wordless book, a book of images, which, when studied and when they're really taken in and when you really know them and understand them, you can start to understand that life goes through these things. Like, life goes through processes, you know. Sometimes you find yourself in a situation which might really resonate with the Hanged Man, for instance. You know, you might be strung out to dry, nobody to help you, and it's obvious to everybody else that you're in a really bad place, you know, like that kind of a situation. But at the same time, when you're hanging upside down, the world looks totally different from the first time, and you get to see it different for the first time. So anyhow, the trumps of the Tarot, not to disregard the minor arcana, but the trumps of the Tarot seem to me to show some sort of actual diagram of spiritual development. And there was this guy named Lord Raglan that wrote this book in the 20s or 30s, I think. He was some British armchair anthropologist. And he wrote this book that was called The Hero, and it was all about the hero, and he looked at like myth and drama and the cultures of the world. And I didn't like most of it at all. But there was this one part where he got down to the point where he said that the mythic hero's life, and he is Oedipus for some reason, but as a prototype. But the mythic hero's life has basically 22 stages. There's 22 trumps of the Tarot. He doesn't say anything about the Tarot in the book. I thought it was pretty mind-blowing. But he says that the mythic hero's life goes through these 22 stages, and then he takes all these myths and adds them up and tries to figure it out. Like, there's all these, like, the hero is usually born of a virgin, is whisked away to avoid trouble because some ruler wants to kill it. I forget all of them. I wish I had them in front of me. Anyhow, and then he graded certain mythic heroes in literature according to his scale to see how they would fare. Like Perseus, or like I said, Oedipus was his prototype. He is like I can't remember all of them, a bunch from Greek and Roman mythology. He used Moses, he used a bunch from the Bible, Abraham, I think. Coincidentally, he didn't use Jesus' life. I think Jesus scores a whopping 19 on Raglan's scale. Like everything matched up, basically. Killed on a hill on a piece of wood, you know, nailed to something, usually. It turns out this has happened in a lot of different places. But I thought that was really interesting. So what is it within like our psyches or our minds or our DNA or our spirits or our culture or collective unconscious or whatever that could have such a obviously noticeable pattern of whatever this thing is, you know? Why would why would all these things be kind of like pointing towards this type of process, you know? And that was really fascinating to me, and I never answered that question. But someday maybe. So models of initiation that I found, that I studied at least, were, for instance, the path of the hero in the world's mythologies seems to offer, like with Raglan's scale, it seems that these aren't just interesting events in the life of some hero in a story. They seem to me to be symbolic of processes we have to go through. You know, you have to be born and have all these things. Sometimes you have to have everything taken away from you. Sometimes you have to be absolutely trampled. Sometimes you have to get to the point where you feel like it would be better if you just put the gun in your mouth. And then other times you get to sleep with the goddess and stuff, you know? I mean, there's ups and downs. So, but as a whole, it seems like there's this arc, and it goes towards something. And that something, I think, what I think it might be is the best way to put it into words is being in a particular state where you're kind of like, you're kind of all good. You've been cooked long enough. A lot of people don't even step in the oven, of course. You know, the world's full of people who don't even care about this stuff and would rather just watch Survivor and eat ice cream and, you know, do whatever, maybe hang out with their friends. But this, to me, is the most important thing that we can do, and I think it's why we're here, and there's all these little clues along the way. So, does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I ask a question, Eddie?
Yeah.
Do you think that, like, it's meant that people look at these figures in stories or in religions and go, wow, that sounds like me, like, I can relate to that, and that's why, and that's religion, and that's what's supposed to make you look self-reflective for answers? Do you think that that's part of the whole story aspect?
Like with mythology?
With
myths?
with mythologies or religions or anywhere where you'd find stories like that.
Do I think that it's the point that people look at those lives?
Yeah, but the point is that you relate
emulate?
to the characters and you can
Right.
go, whoa, okay, well, my life is like that. Maybe I should, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great to be able to be afforded with an influence like that. Like, you know, if you're a Muslim, to have the influence of the prototype of Muhammad, who provides a pretty great, you know, example of how to live. But I think where I was coming from with it, so yes.
I was just thinking with the 22 steps, you know, like how everyone can probably relate to at least most of those, which we go through as human people, you know.
Right. And I think, yeah, going back to the, like, say, the Trumps, I mean, if you start to really, really, really study the tarot, you know, after years, which is what it takes, I mean, it's a very mystery-laden book thing. I mean, it's like, you can't just look at it and say, oh, there's the Emperor card. I know exactly what that means, you know. I mean, it's never going to get to that point. But I think you come to realize that life is kind of like this wheel, and things keep happening. And if you start to familiarize yourself, even ahead of time, with all of those different basic steps, or, you know, stages is a really better word, you know, intervals, then you're more equipped to understand why you're here and what life is made of. I mean, if the rug gets swept out from under you, and you had some inkling that could happen for some particular reason, and maybe be followed by something else or preceded by something, it's kind of, studying the tarot is just kind of like, and all these like 22 stages, all the stages of the hero's life is kind of like understanding what happens to us in life. All of us, everybody goes through this stuff. Everybody always has, you know. And I think that it's really important to get that overview or that bird's eye view, because then things in life start to make sense, and you're not just going through each tiny little thing confusedly, you know, and trying to just find some sense of security, you know. And this way you could maybe find security in getting the rug swept out from under you, which to me is a pretty great place to be. Yeah, since it seems to happen a lot.
Yeah. Can I ask you a really hard question?
Yes.
Okay, this coming from profound admiration for your work. Do you think drinking beer is Cheetos or prayer?
It can be both.
Right now?
Right now? Neither. Neither.
Because you ragged pretty hard on the Cheetos you use.
Yeah.
and I had a great talk last night with Jason and finally understood barfing as prayer.
That's a whole other story. Jason would have a lot to say about
yeah, but
that.
It was a big insight that I had not had.
Yeah.
You're on your knees.
But also the whole because I used to love to teach high when I was in my 20s. I really did, and I found tremendous power in it. But I still haven't come to terms with whether I was training a body part or whether I was destroying it, or and I wonder how because you're so mindful. You're mindful about everything I've ever seen you do, even when it's being in excess, which I know is a part of it. And I want to understand it.
Well, I'd love to talk to you about it. This would take that to a whole other conversation.
But it's what you're talking about.
It is what I'm talking about, yeah. I mean, like, I think as far as substances are concerned, like, we definitely all do things throughout life and through... I've always thought of it kind of like this. It's like there's all sorts of things that are distractions from, like, the path. But sometimes they're part of that path, too.
Or enhancements, even.
Or an enhancement, that's the other thing. I mean, it's like...
There's like Cheetos, prayer, but there's also medicine, you know.
Yeah, I mean...
Maybe that's your, you know.
Definitely.
That's your medicine.
Hey, I'm standing in front of a crowd of people right now for the first time, like, you know, since I was in court. This is, you know, cut me some slack here. But yeah, I think, I don't know, there's a reason they call them spirits.
Yeah.
Exactly.
What's your answer to that? I always wondered that.
I mean, I've had some pretty amazing spiritual, healthy, amazing experiences when I was completely tilted. Do you know what I mean? I mean, there's been other times where it was just like, oh, I shouldn't be doing this because I haven't done anything today. Do you know what I'm saying? It's complex. It's hard. I don't think there's a one answer.
I have a question. Why is it that you put sort of set? Why did you oppose, like, as you said, being a good person to spiritual practice?
I was going to ask that too.
Oh, okay. Okay, yeah, this is a good point. I think being a good person is absolutely necessary. I think that, like, when anyone would try to start out becoming, like, more spiritual, whatever that means, more, you know, religious, become, like, going on the path, the first and most important thing that you train yourself to be able to do is treat everyone as if they're your grandmother. Which I don't always do that, but I think that you should, like, I think being a moral person, not stealing, not hurting other people, not being conniving, not being dishonest, not, you know, hitting another person, all these things. Those were all, like, from the time I was tiny to now. It's healthy if you let it out. Come on, this is about health and all that. Diversity, you know. I think that it's absolutely necessary that people are kind to one another and are very good people and are, you know, mindful all the time. I mean, even if it's the lady in Zanesville, Ohio at 2 o'clock in the morning that you're buying a corn dog from at the gas station. You know, I mean, you have to treat everyone with utmost respect, I think. And I'm definitely not some shining example of that, of course. But that's a prerequisite to practice, I think.
Well,
But that has to be there.
That is kind of. I'm sorry.
Why are you so sorry?
I don't know.
You should be silly.
I know, but that is a practice that, because I think that the thing with beer and Cheetos and whatnot, it's all about acute sensory awareness, and being a good person might emerge from an acute awareness of another person's being. And so that is a spiritual practice, because conventional morality doesn't really do it for you. You know, you have to be like present, like with faith.
It's your morality. Yeah, I mean, you have to decide how you need to be. Yeah, present, being conscious and aware. Yeah, definitely. I'm sure we'll get to that tonight during Flip Cup.
Oh, question about tarot really quick?
Yeah, I really want to, before everybody starts.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I really want to get this one last point in. Okay, one thing I did with my paper is I realized that the best sense I can make of this whole God thing and what God is, and like what it is, or goddess, I'm sorry, is that we all have this sort of thing, like an overself, that or a type of soul, and it's not some ephemeral, elusive, hard to find thing that's like somehow inside of us. I realize that we are all intimately connected with another individual higher being. And this idea is only born out of experience, like experiences that blew my mind more than any amount of DMT could. And they arose organically and because of practice and agony and happiness and all these things. But the point is I called it the Spiritus because I couldn't come up with anything better, and I figured as long as it's in a different language, it at least sounds cool. L. Ron Hubbard knew all about that. But anyhow, I realized that God to me wasn't something out there that's separate from me, but it wasn't necessarily me either. It's more like if you can imagine like a little silver thread coming out of you and being connected to this very powerful entity, very powerful being, but it's individual and different for each person. And you can't just assume it's there, and you can't just think it's there. You have to do certain things, and every once in a while, unexpectedly, it puts its hand on your shoulder, and he really put his hand on my shoulder. It just so happens that the vision I had of this character of mine was a bearded white man, but you know, it could be a jaguar or something else for anybody. It's kind of like the idea of a spirit animal that certain native traditions have. But that was really the big point of my paper as it drawed out, that we do have this thing that's whatever you want to call it. I just wanted to come up with a different name for it. But it's up to us to try to seduce it and come closer to it, because its companion, its knowledge and conversation, some people call it a guardian angel, its conversation and knowledge is what we need more than anything else in life, more than health, wealth, family, and friends. And that thing is what we've always called God. We just thought that there was one God for everybody, which that's kind of a different story that I don't think anybody can answer. But at least I know that I have a divine presence, that I'm not the divine presence. Andy's not the divine presence, you know. I mean, God, well redundant of me. But we do all have that. We are all born with that, and we all need to find that and seek it and realize that it's always there, it's always watching, it's always loved you, and all of the relationships you sought in life are really just mirror reflections of that, and its companionship is unmatched and provides us with the relief that we have always sought for, and the security we've always sought for, and the love we've always sought for, more than any other human being could give us, no matter how great they are. And once that's figured out, and you just realize, I want to talk. I used to have a mantra while I was showering, where I'd say, I want to talk to you, 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 over and over again. And I swear to God, after 5 minutes, it was like he was there. It's like, all right, yeah, thanks for. I could have said it once, you know, but it's like that, and that's the most important thing in the world to me, and that's the concluding thing in the paper. And I think we have to be done now. Okay, so thank you very much for coming. Sorry I didn't have a question and answer session. Could have done this for 3 hours. Huh? Yeah, I thought.